Are we live? Really? Once and for all? Hi guys. Um, I'm gonna come clean to you. I'm a little aggravated right now. We're obviously starting a couple minutes late. I'm having some tech woes. Among those tech woes, I ended up like inadvertently starting the other stream and then ending it, which I think causes YouTube to kill the stream. So the other live stream that we were scheduled for is now a dead one, which obviously, if you're hearing me say these words right now, you already know. And if you don't already know, you're not hearing me say those words right now. Anyway, I hope everyone finds their way into the room. I am glad to be with you guys regardless. I'm a little flustered. I'm a little scattered, but we're going to find our footing and settle in for a great round of grade school. Another fun fact, this is just between us here in this room. This actually marks somewhere around, I think this might be our 100 or even 101st episode of grade school. Don't tell anybody because I actually want to have like a big, exciting, proper celebratory 100th episode of grade school. So we're going to cook the books and do some funny math to have a 100th episode probably next week because to be honest with you guys, totally snuck up on me. The last time I thought to go like, hey, where are we at in terms of grade school tally? We were at like 80 something. But time flies and I completely lost track of that. So here we are. It's 101. Like I said, don't tell anybody. It's our secret. And we're going to have a faux or a kludged up 101st episode with some proper celebration. And I'm going to try to do some special stuff in that episode very, very soon. But regardless, it's a special session today. It's always a special episode of grade school anytime we get to do it. I'm really excited to be with you guys. Obviously, had a little bit of tech trouble getting started this morning, so thanks for your patience. I'm also in the midst of moving studios. I think I mentioned that during our last episode of grade school, which is partly to blame for why I'm taking a little bit longer to get organized and figure out how to get this live stream going because more than half of my studio is now at a different location. I'm still at my home location. I'm going to be making some content and hopefully doing some grade schools from the new studio very soon. Excited to show that to you guys because it's come together. Starting to look really cool, but that's partly to blame for me being a little disorganized. I'm like, oh wait, what pieces do I have and how can I make grade school happen from the house this morning? At the moment, I feel like I am equally out of water and flustered at both locations because I haven't finished making the transition. But I digress. We're already a couple minutes late. I want to dive in. I want to hear what questions everybody has. My buddy Rafa's here with me. Rafa's had a chance, I think, to take a look at some of the questions that you guys already thoughtfully dropped into the first live stream, the ill-fated live stream that I killed. So let's kick it off. Let's hear what kind of questions we got here today, Raf.
We have a couple of questions here about how does the middle grade point travel between color spaces? Like, for example, if you're working using Panasonic Vlog and you are doing color management to DaVinci Intermediate, where should the pivot point be? Should you aim to 3, 4, 1, like in DaVinci Intermediate, or for example, 0.433 like in Vlog?
And sorry, at the beginning of the question, are we working in Vlog or working in DaVinci Wide Gamut?
I assume he's working in Vlog and transforming into DaVinci Intermediate.
Got it. Okay, cool. So here's an easy way to think about that. You're like middle gray. You always want to think about middle gray. Just think of it as 18% linear. That's really what middle gray is when we're talking about it. That's, by the way, an arbitrary value, but it's just 18% gray, literally 0.18 when you're in linear. So whenever you move into any log curve, say DaVinci Intermediate, that 0.18 is going to map to a new position. That's, of course, how we get our pivot point or our middle gray point in that log encoding. So if we just do a quick hypothetical here, even better than a hypothetical, let's actually take a look here. And by the way, let me know if like all of this is working. I'm actually on another machine here today and like I think I got everything set up properly, but hopefully you guys can see my screen and all the stuff you need to for us to have a great grade school session here. But like this is going to hopefully be very obvious when I sketch it out for you. But if I am working in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, which indeed I am, and I go to DaVinci Wide Gamut, actually we can kind of do this in reverse. Let's just kind of like forget about the image here for a second completely and just focus on the CST. We can even kind of get the viewer up out of our way here for now and just look at the CST. So actually, how do I want to do that? No, never mind. We're not going to forget about the image. It'll still be helpful, even though right now it looks totally zany. So this is not a proper transform for this image right now. But if we look at, just what's happening here, we are starting linear, and imagine that 18% gray value. Let's in fact do better than imagining and actually take a look at that 18% gray value by pulling up a patch of 18% gray. Oh, let's see. Oh, my DCTLs are not online. Well, that's going to make things interesting. Okay, no big deal. Just imagine we are feeding a 0.18 through this transform right now. It starts as 0.18. Because it's going into DaVinci Intermediate, it's going to plot, in that case, to a 0.336, okay? What's going to happen when we invert this and we go back to linear? We can do that by, so I'm going to just label these as we go. We'll say toLin, and then I'm going to do a new serial node and then hit Command V, and then go to this great swap feature that I love in Resolve 18.5. And actually, I mislabeled these. This one is going to lin. This one is going to log, or to DaVinci wide gamut, okay? What happens as a net of this round trip? Nothing, right? It's a do nothing round trip. That might seem obvious, but I feel like it's worth emphasizing because you are going to end up, anytime you are moving into a curve and back out of a curve, you're going to end up right where you started. So, and we're always going to be connecting through linear. So in your example of starting with Vlog and then moving into DaVinci wide gamut, what you are actually doing, the way that the color science is being applied under the hood there is like so. You are starting in Panasonic, like so. You are going into V-gamut, like so. So we're going into Lin. And then you are going from Panasonic V-gamut linear into DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate. So you would normally just do this in one step, right? Like there's no reason to do this in two pieces. I'm doing it in two pieces here to show you what's actually happening in anytime you move from one log curve to the other. Anytime you do that, you're first going to go through linear. So you're going to decode whatever your middle gray was in V-gamut. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I think Ralph said 0.4 something or other. You're going to decode from 0.4. What are you going to get back? Right back to 18% gray, right back to 18% linear. What's going to happen to that 18% linear? It's going to feed into DaVinci Intermediate, and you're going to end up with a 0.336. So you can easily follow mid-gray through any number of encodes and decodes just by understanding that, like, hey, it's going to start at 18% when it encodes to a log curve, and it's going to decode back to 18% whenever you linearize it, which means it'll be set up to then encode to whatever the middle gray is for the next log curve that you're going into, okay? That's kind of the backdrop of the context for that. So what does that mean for your specific question? If I'm grading in V-gamut and downstream I'm transforming into DaVinci wide gamut intermediate, that means that your mid-gray in your grading space is the mid-gray of Vlog, right? As opposed to DaVinci intermediate. Hope that answers your question and also gives you some principles for navigating matters of mid-gray, which, as you guys know, is perhaps my favorite subject in all of image science.
Question here about color management. When you are doing color management by nodes, and you set the color space of the timeline to, let's say, DaVinci wide gamut, but you start working in ACES, also nodes. How does the color management work under the scenes? Are your tools working in ACES, or are your tools working in Resolve color management?
That's a big question. It depends on the tools. Most tools are, easiest way to answer that question or to give the context for it would be to check out the recent color space aware video that I did here on the channel. So it essentially depends on the color space awareness, or what we could call color space unawareness or color space ignorance of a tool. So like if you're talking about really the HDR zones in Resolve, though, and you've got your color space properly tagged up here. So I'm telling Resolve correctly that using nodes, I am effectively grading in DaVinci wide gamut intermediate. And I, for example, tag my node for, let's say ACES CC AP1, which would be, like, or let's call it ACES CCT, actually. This would be now grading in ACES. I'm now going to be, my tools here are going to be grading in ACES, because Resolve is taking the timeline color space that I've told it here and using that as the input of a transform that ends with AP1 ACES CCT. Okay, that's in the case of a color space aware tool. In the case of most color grading tools in Resolve, most color grading tools in general, you're just going to be grading in whatever you're grading in. So like in your primaries here, like those are going to end up reacting a little bit differently in one space versus the other. And it kind of depends on if you're using, like, if you're moving into ACES CCT using tags, like I just talked about, then that might net you a slightly different result than if you use color space transforms. Actually, am I right about that? I don't think I'm right about that. That's gonna give you the same thing, whether you're moving into ACES CCT with nodes and then back out of ACES CCT with another node after the fact, or you're just using the tags like I just did. You're going to get the same behavior out of your primaries, which really is not going to be any different. Let's just try something here. We will get, no, I take it back. We're going to get a difference there. Yeah. So you're effectively grading in whatever space you elect when you tag here, if that makes sense. Same thing will be true whether we are in our primaries or actually, you know what? You know who should go watch my color space aware video? Me, because I got that backwards. Let's do a quick reset here. I want to get on the record and get it succinct and correct. When you are using a color space aware tool, which in Resolve is really just the HDR zones, and you are tagging an alternate color space of, say, again, AP1, ACES CCT. If I make an adjustment in here, let's say I'm pulling an even stop of exposure, okay? Here's what that looks like when I am working, when I've tagged my node to be ACES CCT, okay? Let's grab a still of that. I'm gonna wipe out my gallery here. Now, let's set our color space and gamma back to use timeline. No change, right? Because Resolve is smart enough to know when it's doing its internal processing to give the consistent behavior that you get with a color space aware tool, it knows that it needs to bear in mind that this node is no longer in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, but ACES CCT. So I actually got it dead backwards. For color space aware tools, tagging things differently here, or even tagging things differently here, which is your other option with the color space aware HDR zones, that's going to ensure that you get identical results. Different behavior, identical results, to use the language that I used in that video, versus when you're using color space ignorant or color space unaware tools, you are going to get identical behavior, but different results because of the transforms that are coming before or after. It's a little bit confusing, but that's kind of the rule of thumb. Color space aware tools are going to look the same regardless of how you've got your node tagged or how you're moving yourself in and out of particular color spaces. Color space unaware tools are actually going to change depending on the tag that you're in. And just to make sure that I've answered the question fully, the other component of this would be if you're just lying. So let's say we're not talking about bookended color space transforms and we're not talking about tagging the node, the two hypotheticals that I've contemplated thus far. And instead we're doing, we're just doing straight up offset. Like, let's get out of this HDR zones here. So we're just doing straight up offset, okay? Now, if I'm doing offset like this, and I change my timeline color space, gosh, I know I've talked about it so much here in grade school, but like every time we wrap CCA, I get newly addicted to the higher interactivity of a Zoom webinar. I wish we were in a Zoom right now because I want to hear from you guys. I want to do a pop quiz. My pop quiz to you that you can answer to yourself is, what is going to happen to this graded image when I change my timeline color space? The only, and bear in mind, the only change that I've made in this grade is to the offset here. What's going to happen when I make this change? So let's make it to something really different so it's obvious. So it's not going to be a subtle change in color space, okay? Let's just go to like, I don't know, Rec 709A. It doesn't really matter. What's going to happen when I do this? Think to yourself for just a minute before I hit the button. Did you get the answer? Nothing. Nothing's going to happen because this is a color space aware tool, or a color space unaware tool, I should say. Contrast that with, let's go back to DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, and let's do a pull of 1 even stop of exposure in the HDR zones. We're going to get that. Now, what's going to happen when I make the same adjustment? The image is going to change, right? Because Resolve is now using the information that it's using the information I've provided here to, that is its source of awareness, if that makes sense. And I am now giving it faulty awareness. I am telling it, hey, the image that I'm grading right here is in Rec 709A. That's a lie. So I'm now getting incorrect behavior. So that's why we always want to tag this straight up, and we want to make sure that it is correct. And if for whatever reason you want to work in ACES CCT for the purposes of like applying a LUT, maybe you can do that. But with a color space aware tool, the result is going to be no different. With a color space unaware tool, it will change depending on how you either tag your node or create color space transforms in and out of that space. This is slippery, and I feel like I made a bit of a mess explaining that succinctly. Ask me again next week, and I'll fire through it and give it to you in a little bit more succinctly. But we found our way, right?
Super fun question here. Is there any way to do some kind of SAT versus SAT operation, but per channel, like only operating in the saturation in the red or in the green, for example? And I want to add, if you feel a little bit spicy, what about other kind of curves, like let's say SAT versus LUM, for example? How can you recreate those per channel in Resolve? And also, it seems like I'm muted today, so to repeat my questions loudly.
Oh, okay. So let me take 5 seconds and see if I can get Rafa unmuted. He's just observed that he's not currently coming in. Oh, I see. Hang on. I know this one. Okay, so we're going to go to... is that right? You know what? I'm not going to mess with this. I'll repeat the questions today. So that was a meaty question that we just had come in. Essentially, the starting point was, can we do a SAT versus SAT curve that is only affecting particular channels or particular hues? So like only in your reds or only in your greens, for example. And Rafa's very juicy add to that question is, could we do other type of curve operations that are hue limited or channel limited so that we're not uniformly affecting all of our hues, but we're only affecting, for example, our reds or our greens? I think about this a lot. This is a really good question to cover. So I'll give you the first answer. This is actually something that is going to be available in a tool, in a product that I'm going to be sharing more with you guys about very, very soon, that I'm really, really excited about. We've been working on it for most of this year, and I'm really excited to share it. So this is, I think, a very worthy area of exploration. I'll put it that way. And I'm excited to share the way we've implemented it in this tool and the functionality that it offers in this tool. I'll be sharing more about that with you guys before the year is out, for sure. For today, here are your two options. Here are the two ways we can think about it. So let's kind of design a quick experiment here. Let's just say, like, by the way, this cannot continue. Cullen is working color managed with no LUT whatsoever. Oh, and I don't have my LUT library. Oh no. Okay, well, I guess we're gonna have to just live with this baked in look. That's okay, or this lack of a look, I should say. So let's look at it this way. Let's say we have drawn a SAT curve for our image, or maybe we want to use it as part of our overall look. And that could be, let's just go really vanilla and start with like, hey, we've done a SAT versus SAT curve that we really like, okay? So that might be something like starting really strong and then kind of petering off. Maybe I'll even do something like this. And then kind of as we climb, like, I'm just sort of making this up, but you know, maybe something like that is nice. Let's come up with a better example. That's a vanilla example inside Resolve. I don't love the SAT versus SAT curves because they're basically applying like video style saturation. Let's do it like this. we're going to use our tags. We're going to say HSV for our color space. We're going to go to channel 2 only. And now we can just use our custom curves to do a sat versus sat curve. And in doing so, we're going to get a more filmy, more subtractive result. So that's much better, by my eye anyway. So we've got this sat curve, and we think it's pretty good. But our question is, what can we do what if we wanted to limit this per channel? Well, we've kind of got two options here that we can work with. The first one would be to use a qualifier, right? Just do a really wide qualifier. So if I do, a hue width of like 30, the total width of the hue qualifier is 100, right? So if I wanted to get 1/3 of that for, let's say we want to apply this to my greens, okay? 1/3 of that would be green, or would be one channel, right? And then I'm just going to center this until it's resting roughly over my greens. And I'm kind of on purpose, like right now I'm just qualifying this and looking at the image. Let me make this even a little bit bigger for you guys. And you can see like where it's tearing, right? So let's actually move this center point to a bit of a different spot here until I'm looking at my vector scope actually to see where things are popping out. And I'm going to change my story. Let's say we want to do this to our cyans. There's a little bit more going on there. And you can see it's like breaking up and very chattery on the edges right now because I've got no softness. So now I'm just going to go to my softness and add a ton of that in. And if I felt like it was going to help clean it up a little bit, I could go to the luminance and maybe scoop the bottom end a little bit there. So I'm just like getting that chatter out of there that may, in terms of like color science, have some kind of hue, but in terms of my perception, I really don't care if I saturate those deep black shadows. So something like that would be acceptable to do. Let's just like zoom in here. How's that handling around her hair? That's okay. I might need even more softness in my luminance qualifier or even in my hue qualifier. This is where ultimately you're just going to want to like use your eyes to assess like how soft and wide do I need to go. And it also may be a question of like, well, you may not be able to go as hard with your correction. So that would be one option that you could try. Here's another one that just occurred to me that we're just going to have to see how this feels, okay? So what I'm going to do is create how am I going to do this? This may not be the cleanest path, but this will be a way of accomplishing what I have in mind. What I want to do is use a channel splitter, a splitter combiner node to accomplish what I'm after. So I'm going to do a splitter combiner. And this is something I've been kicking around a lot. This is kind of an advanced geeky technique, but it's also pretty powerful. I can actually use the splitter combiner. If we look at, by the way, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, a splitter combiner simply takes the input node and separates out red, green, and blue. So if we zoom out here, this is my red channel, this is my green channel, this is my blue channel. What's fun about these is, take a look at these two, or these three rather. Do you see any chatter or any noise in any of these channels? I don't see any, right? They're very, very clean. They're quite broad. They're not very selective of particular hues. They're literally representing 1/3 of the image apiece, but they're very clean. So for example, if I want to do this experiment by saturating my reds, then it could literally be as simple as killing the combiner. I don't need the combiner. I'm actually going to just connect these like so, because all I'm doing here is using this splitter to create a mask channel. So what I'm going to do now is take the red output and pipe it into, I might actually need there to be a node there. So I'm going to take the output of the red channel and pipe it as a key into this sat versus sat. And now I'm saturating just that portion of the image. I'm masking this image using the red channel, like so. Now, like I said, it's very broad and it's affecting like a large portion of the image, but it's also very, very clean. So that's something else that you could play around with, is basically limiting a sat versus sat adjustment by a particular channel. And if I wanted to get my greens, I could do like so. And again, you can see like pretty much like it's in all cases, like large portions of the image are being affected, but it's favoring red, green, or blue, depending on which one I select here. You could even get fancy, like, and, you know, operate directly on the channel if you wanted to. So I just bumped that inadvertently. But if you want to, like, here's a fun trick for a mask channel in general. If you want to make it so that, like, hey, I'm masking based on my blue channel right now, and I only want, I want to, like, be more selective. Like, you got to be really blue before you're going to be affected by this sat versus sat thing. You can just gamma this channel down. And now you can see, like, now I'm having almost no effect. I went too far. But if I start to open this back the other direction, you know, here's my baseline. And as I drop this down, I'm going to see less and less effect because it's I'm tamping down the signal, and there needs to be a stronger and stronger blue input in order for the sat curve to select the pixels, if that makes sense. So that's two ways that you could think about that. Qualifier allows you to be more selective, but the flip side, anytime we're getting selective or narrow or more focused, is we're more prone to create noise. A splitter combiner has the benefit of giving you a much cleaner selection, although it's going to be much broader in nature. So depends on what you're trying to do as to which one of these is going to work better for you. But two fun ways to think about limiting any operation to a particular band of hues or to a particular color channel. And you could now extrapolate this out and do this with a sat versus sat curve, or with a sat versus loom, or anything else, because you're literally just masking the result of whatever you're doing here in node number 3 using either your red, green, or your blue channel, or using a qualifier in the case of that prior example that we made. I hope you find that interesting. I've actually been playing around with that a lot lately and really enjoying it.
Question here about stills. When you are exporting stills from the gallery, is there any special consideration that you might want to have in order to have a good reproduction? For example, in Mac OS, you usually export RX79A for video. So is there any specific consideration for those stills?
Ooh, I feel like I'm teasing you guys a lot today, and I don't mean to. This is also something that I am thinking about a lot lately, and specific guidance on how to get the best possible match when you export a still and load it up in Preview, for example, in Mac OS, is going to be included in a resource that I'm working really hard on right now called the Gamma Shift Guide, which is aimed at being a comprehensive guide to navigating all of the different ways where we can get what we often refer to as gamma shift, but what we can think of more broadly is like, hey, it looked one way on my monitor in Resolve when I was grading, and now it looks some other kind of way, either on a web browser or in Preview or on my phone or on a TV or on my laptop. All the different ways this can go down that we tend to lump all together and call it the gamma shift problem. Well, the problem with the gamma shift problem is it's not one problem, but the Gamma Shift Guide is aimed at sort of breaking apart, like, here are all of the things that can contribute to that incorrect rendering, and here are the ways to solve each of those problems or causes, depending on what is creating them. So I don't have a great answer for you on that today. It's on my list to like do a full exploration of. I will say, just in passing, I don't normally export Rec 709A. I export 709 Gamma 2.4 because that's what my monitor is set up for. And 709A, we're probably due for a dedicated grade school on that topic, but it's something to be avoided unless you have someone who wants to look at something in QuickTime, and in order for it to look correct in QuickTime, because QuickTime is broken, you have to tag in metadata your render as Rec 709A. That's like the one cutout situation where I would use Rec 709A for anything. Other than that, it's just a sort of like non-standard standard that is going to create as many problems as solutions. So I advise against it. But that's typically like the what I would think of in terms of stills, like short of having a guide on this that I'm working on now. I typically don't export and share stills for color critical review. I will export a QuickTime and send a link that I know can be rendered in a predictable and accurate way because I've just had more time to kind of kick the tires on that. So at the moment, my solution, is bad as it sounds, is not to use stills as a form of review, either for myself or for my clients.
Question here about matching clips. Can you explain the shot match use of the color match once you right click and use the auto color match in the drop down menu? Is there any practical use for that, and how are the colors bending in that operation?
Yes, that's a good question. I actually don't know off the top of my head how that works. I don't even remember. Is it like this? Yeah, shot match to this clip. That would be the first time I've clicked that in a really long time. Yeah, so it's doing, okay. So it's doing a color match, which actually I don't know if we talked about this in the pre-recorded video, but we talked about in the grade school episode that followed my recent pre-recorded video on using color charts. We covered the fact that the color match is under the hood actually using a 3x3 matrix operating in linear. So that's essentially what's being cooked up here is it's two things. It's going to be some kind of like a 1D tone curve, which is why we're seeing that exposure change. And it's going to be followed by a 3x3 matrix. You can even see we can see the tone curve graphed. Oh my goodness, I'm like crippled without my DC or my LUTs and stuff. Let's just create a grayscale real fast. My favorite animal. I'll call this ramp. And I'm going to go over here and just paste this correction here. And if I open up my waveform, you can actually see the 1D curve that Resolve created via whatever mechanism to try to match the tones of shot A to shot B. And then this is followed, the part that we're not going to see graphed here in the waveform is a 3x3 matrix that's being produced to align the colors. So for me, it's like, all right, this kind of a black box. Like I sort of understand what's happening, but it's not like I can see the primaries adjustments over here and finesse them. And it's also a very coarse tool in the sense that I'm not being asked what part of this frame do you want to match to which part of this other frame, if that makes sense. So it's just like some sort of coarse fitting that's happening that I've never found a use for in my workflow. That's a bit of a tech explanation of what it's doing. But I think in terms of practical implications, I've never encountered a situation where it's like, whether we're going from, do I have any sort of like similar coverage hiding out somewhere in here? Not really, but I've never encountered a situation where, I'm looking at, whatever the cut from here to there and going like, where it's not just easier to adjust exposure and contrast first, because that's the foundation of a good match, and then to get the color balance in place using something like offset or linear gain. I've never encountered a situation where that wasn't faster, easier, and more flexible than using the color match function by doing that right-click workflow that we just explored. For what that's worth.
A couple of questions here about your Voyager LUT Pack. The first one is, can you use the Voyager LUT Pack if you, for example, happen to be color managing Apple log and you want to use the Apple lookup table that transforms that Apple log to Rec 709? And also, another question is, how would you approach using your Voyager lookup tables to grade scan film?
Ooh, two fun questions. All right, so I feel like I forgot on that last one to repeat Rafa's question, but I'll remember this one this time. So the question is essentially, when you're working with Apple log material, I'm going to get my, actually I'm relaunching Resolve right now so I can get Voyager and a couple other things in place. But while I'm doing that, I'll talk you through how I would think about that. When you are grading Apple log material, where are all my LUTs? When you're grading Apple log material and you want to grade through Apple's provided Rec 709 transform, is there a way to marry that to use of the Voyager LUTs? Yes, there absolutely is. You just need that path from Apple log to Rec 709 to include a detour into DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, because that's what Voyager is set up for, right? So the short answer, yeah, absolutely. The more nuanced answer would be that you are going to be looking at an image. Like, let's say you run your image through that pipeline and you apply one of the LUTs from my Voyager LUT pack. You at that moment will be looking at a rendering of the image that I never accounted for when I designed these LUTs for you guys. Is it going to be ugly? Maybe not. Maybe it'll look great, but it will be uncharted, if that makes sense. Because when I designed Voyager, I did it underneath a Resolve color management display rendering, which is different from Apple's Apple log to Rec 709 display rendering, or Aries log C to Rec 709 rendering. Like, those are different ways of getting to Rec 709. So you're going to be looking at an untested rendering of the image that Voyager may play great with, or it may not play great with. You'll just have to experiment for yourself and take a look. So that would be kind of the first part of the question is, can you use Voyager with something like Apple log? Yes, absolutely. Okay, sorry, I'm having to do some housekeeping in the background here. Now, the second part of the question was, can you manage scanned film using Voyager, and how would you go about doing that? Yes, you can, and I will show you how I would go about that right now. Let's do this. I've got a machine, not that you guys care about the details here, but I'm now running a machine here at the house that has been kind of out of service, or just hasn't been my main machine for like a year or so now. So nothing is quite where it belongs until I get it all set up. But I can now relaunch Resolve, and we'll flip over to it and take a look at managing film scans inside of Resolve color management. Think about for yourself. Does anybody have a brilliant answer out there? By the way, I haven't even looked at the chat yet today. Thatcher's in the house. Jim's here. Glad you guys are here. Glad everyone found their way in after that misfire of me stopping and starting the live stream. All right, I'm loading up Resolve. I promise, I swear, we're going to get more color grading magic covered here today. And I want to see, I don't have any film scans, so we'll have to use our bit of our imaginations here today in terms of how the image actually looks when we do this film scan management thing. But here's how I would go about this. Color managing film scans is tricky business because, as many of you guys know, film doesn't have like a definitive defined color space by nature. It's just chemistry. It depends on the role of film. It depends on many factors as to like what the effective primaries and tonal response of that film were. So unbuilding it back into like an XYZ linear so that you can go into whatever other color space you want, which is a long way of saying color managing. Doing that with film, it's not so straightforward. However, I think the best standard that has come out for it that I'm aware of anyway is the ACES ADX standard. ADX stands for Academy Density Exchange, and it was devised to address this very problem. So here's how I would do this. Let's pretend that this image, which is not a film scan, is a film scan. And I'm going to go ahead and remove it from my group, which is managing it as Area Wide Gamut 3. Okay, so let's just remove it from here. So right now, if I look at my pipeline, I'm going from DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate out to my display space. So all is good here. All I need to do is set up the front end of my color management so that I am in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate when this transform hits, right? So we're going to do this in 2 steps so that we can take advantage of the ACES ADX standard. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our ACES transform, and we're going to set our output transform to no output transform. By the way, a bit confusingly, in an ACES transform, no input transform and no output transform. Those are both shorthand for ACES AP0 linear, or the color space that's sometimes called ACES. It's like the big master ACES space. That's actually the space I want to move into from my scanned film metric of ADX, Academy Density Exchange. So this I'm going to leave alone. My input transform, I'm going to use ADX 10. There's 10 and 16 here. 10 is the one you generally are going to want to use. So I'm going to go from ADX 10 into ACES linear, and things look way worse than they did a moment ago. So we seem to be trending down, right? But what we're going to do next is, and let me label these as well. So we're going to go to ACES, and then in this CST is where we're going to pay things off and get into DaVinci wide gamut. So I'm going to go from ACES AP0 linear, and we're going to move into DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate, like so. Now, again, this is actually not a piece of scanned film, so the color management doesn't look particularly compelling, but this is the best openly available solution for color managing scanned film in my experience.
Question about Resolve OFX. Most of the OFX are designed to work in a Rec. 709 environment. So do you have any best practice for example, using the halation that it seems like breaks easily if your color space is not Rec. 709, the halation OFX in Resolve, I mean. Any insight on how to use OFX in color management?
So the question is essentially, it seems that most of the OpenFX filters in Resolve are set up or optimized to work in a display like Rec. 709 space, as opposed to in a scene or a log space, with a specific example being halation, and saying that it doesn't work great in something like a log space. I mean, in this case, you've got a processing color space right up here. So to be honest with you, I don't typically use this. I have my own sort of like custom halation setup that I like a lot. I've also been using the halation in Filmbox quite a bit, which is a third-party plugin. I'm using it specifically for that. So I'm more inclined to use those resources for getting a halation effect. However, with the halation effect in Resolve, let's go to an image where we're actually going to have some highlights that are bright enough to halate. I don't know if that's a word. It can be a word. Let's make it a word, right? I don't know, maybe this one here, maybe that tube will actually respond like I'm hoping. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have to say, even after having selected DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, I think the assumption proves out fairly well here. Like, that doesn't look awesome. Not what I'm expecting anyway. So, like, what do we get if we go over here? Wait a minute. This can't possibly be correct. Like I said, I haven't used this in a long time. Wow. That looks terrible. Sorry, Blackmagic. That's not good. I take one look at that and my confidence is badly shaken as to whether this can ever be tamed into a good spot. So to be honest, after taking a quick look at that, I would say no. Like, that's not one that I would use. I think that's a conservative but pretty functional principle to apply to any OpenFX filter. If you drop it on and it looks terrible, yes, all OpenFX filters have parameters and maybe you can tweak one or two of them and instantly get it looking decent. But if it looks terrible the moment you drop it on, that might be a clue that it's just not a good plugin to use. Like, you know, what's Emboss going to do when I drop it on here? Yeah, I mean, I don't even know exactly what that's for, but that is not something I'm looking for. You know, whatever. Like, a lot of these, to be fair, I think are sort of silly, and I don't quite know what the use case would be. You know, like the tilt shift thing. You know, that's just a no. That doesn't look very compelling or credible or pleasing to me. So that's kind of a non-answer, to be honest with you. I use these sparingly for sure. Film grain can work great. Texture pop can work great using the right parameters at a tasteful level. We've got a video on that out there. Those are honestly the main ones that I use. The beauty one, like, I don't feel like it works any worse in log than it does in Rec 7 and 9. I just tend not to love what it does in general, but like if you really fuss over the parameters, you can get some decent results out of that. The main one, good starting point being like, hey, just give me the full quality. That's never a good trade to make in color grading. It's like, oh, I don't care if it looks its best. I just want it to be fast. Like, that's not a good trade in my opinion. So this one, in the right context, used sparingly, used tastefully, can be helpful. And I don't think it's any different really doing it in log than it is in Rec 7 or 9. So I don't know. That would be kind of my rambling roundup of which OpenFX plugins I like to use and how I use them, and the ones that I now know to avoid. That halation thing, honestly, I haven't looked at that I don't know when the last time I looked at that halation plugin was, but I feel like it's worse. Maybe it's just like fresh eyes looking at it, but that's not good. I would not use that. All right, we got time for a couple more.
A fun question here about temperature management. What is the difference between using linear gain, HDR temp and tint, HDR offset, the HDR sliders, which I think are also temp and tint, and chromatic adaptation?
Oh. So the question is, what's the difference between using tools in the HDR zones such as temp, tint, and global exposure or global offset versus chromatic adaptation? So some of those don't relate to chromatic adaptation at all. I actually think I saw Thatcher give a good definition in the chat that I'll just quickly recap. Chromatic adaptation is just a pre-computed matrix, or a like an interpolation of a couple different pre-computed matrices to get a particular result. So chromatic adaptation is just a 3x3 matrix. It's just going to change the way that your colors are rendered. It's not going to do anything tonally in terms of changing your exposure or anything like that. Although maybe you were asking about just RGB balance using the global wheel inside of the HDR zones. But at any rate, to be honest, I don't exactly know the math that's being used in the temp and tint knobs in the HDR zones. I know it's being applied in a linear domain. I think it's being used in what's called an LMS color space or model, which stands for long, medium, short, the three wavelength receptors of our eyes. So they're trying to make it somewhat colorimetric, which is also how chromatic adaptation works. It's trying to use a pre-computed matrix that colorimetrically takes you from, say, D65 to D60 white point. So I would say, like, in broad terms, the difference between chromatic adaptation, here are the two main things that have occurred to me in terms of like chromatic adaptation versus temp and tint in HDR zones. First of all, chromatic adaptation is parameters where temp and tint, or chromatic adaptation is selections where temp and tint is like tunable, right? So like chromatic adaptation, you pick a source and you pick a destination, or a source and a target, versus temp and tint, those are just knobs. That right there is maybe the most meaningful distinction, because I find when I'm color grading, by the time I'm actually grading, I'm looking for a knob, not a pair of drop-down selections. That would be number one. Number two is that chromatic adaptation is driven by a 3x3 matrix. And while it is possible that temp and tint are also applying some sort of like, weighted 3x3 matrix, I doubt it. I think it's probably a form of linear gain in an LMS color space. If I had to make a guess, it's going to be something in that neighborhood. So they're just sort of different instruments. Now, how does that like play out on the image? Depends on the image that you're looking at. But I would say in general, I think I use chromatic adaptation more for like, hey, we would like to bake, we're mastering Rec 7 or 9. Rec 7 or 9 has a D65 white point, but we would like to bake a D60 white point into this project. The way I would do that, if I had a client come to me tomorrow and they said that's what they wanted for their film, let's do it like this. Upstream of my Rec 7 or 9, I would do a D65 to D60 chromatic adaptation. Now I'm baking a D60 white point into my deliverable. That's how I would, one example of how I might use chromatic adaptation as like a macro level and explicit adjustment to the white point of the image. Other than that, I would use, if it's a matter of like, hey, I want this to be warmer, but warmer in the way that I want it to be warmer, which is really all we're talking about with any temp or tint knob, is if we're using it because we believe we are going to get the right kind of warmth and cooling rather, for our creative intent. So the way I would use HDR temp is if it was providing the kind of warmth, if I wanted warmth in the image and the temp knob gave me that kind of warmth that I wanted. That sounds kind of obvious and silly, but like that's really the only time you would use any temperature or tint knob, is if it's like, yeah, it warms and cools in this particular way and I like it. And it warms and cools in a way that I want for my image. What would we do other than that? What would be the alternative to that? Alternative to that would simply be linear gain. Or as you asked in your question, global RGB in the HDR zones, which is effectively the same thing, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I would think about that, is like, do you want it to be in your hands or do you want it to be explicit, like to go to from D65 to D60, for example, or do you want it to be in your hands? And if you want it to be in your hands, do you like what that hand adjustment does for your creative intent? That would be a decision tree that would lead me to HDR temp or tint. If not, it would lead me to like my, like RGB primaries, like linear gain type of thing. So yeah, hope that gives some context for that question. Let's do one more.
Let's do a question from Jim Robinson. He wants to know what is your order of operations, not in terms of nodes, but in terms of what you tackle first. And also, if you usually grade the hero shot at the timeline level and then adjust the difference at the clip level or at the post group or whatever. So in terms of order of operations, where do you start? Do you start looking at the scopes? Do you start looking at the images itself? And do you tackle first luminance or contrast or hues?
Cool. Good questions, Jim. Thanks for being here today. So the question is essentially like, what is your order of operations? What do you tackle first, second, and third in terms of like luminance, contrast, exposure, balance, windows, secondaries? Like, what order do you tackle those things in? And do you like grade your hero shots first or set looks on your hero shots first? So here's the way that I like to do those things. I will, when I'm setting a look, my kind of rule of thumb is like the first do no harm principle. Like, the look has to serve all the images. It may do more for some images than others, but it can't, if it makes 5 images look great, but it makes one image look a little bit worse than it did before, the look's not done. I got to think of some other way to accomplish what I'm doing, which might be as simple as doing less, because the look has to serve all the shots. It can't be selective. It can do more for some shots than the others, but it can't do good things for some shots at the expense of doing bad things for other shots. So that's kind of my principle for setting the look, how I know, like how far to take it. And, regardless of whatever particular image I'm on at the time, I know that I need to flip through all my images and make sure that it's working for all those images. But generally, I don't know if it's hero shots, but I will set the look on more balanced shots. So like shots that I feel like represent the strongest images from the show, like the best captured images, simply because they're going to be the most receptive to a look that is not localized or corrective in nature. So that's kind of how I think about the look side of it. Now, order of operations, what do you tackle first, second, third, and last? I think we might have touched on this in grade school last time, but to be honest, I don't remember. My default answer there is my order of operations, unless there is a specific reason to do otherwise, my order of operations and my chronological order of operations mirrors my sequential order of operations in terms of node numbers here. Okay. So if I have whatever exposure ratio balance as, like my stock tree, like we're always talking about. That's the order. Like one of the reasons I set this up in this way is because I want to do exposure first. Then I want to move on to contrast ratio. Then I want to move on to my color balance. So I want my node graph to mirror my chronological priorities, if that makes sense. Now, there are some cases where that's not true. The most glaring one being what we just talked about, implementing the look. I implement the look very first thing, but where does the look land in the pipeline? At the very end. The look is going to come here, right? But that's a necessity. The look has to come here in terms of processing order, and chronologically, the look needs to come at the beginning of the process. So that's a rare instance where it's like, hey, ideally this would chronologically and sequentially be in the same position, but it just doesn't work that way. Those two priorities point different directions. So that's the one big outlier. Other than that, once I've got that look set, I want to do these things in the same order as my priorities, because the reality is if I were instead to do, I don't know, like balance and then ratio and then exposure, like that's not inferior in any way in terms of the processing. I'm not handcuffing myself or limiting myself or compromising my image in any way by operating on the image in this order. I'm not saying that the same sequence of adjustments ordered in this way will look the same. They'll look different, but I'm just going to use my eyes at that point anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I default to the preference of like, well, then how the heck should I order my nodes if there's not necessarily, like a right way to do it in terms of optimal processing? The way I decide how to order my nodes is I order them to mirror my chronological priority, if that makes sense. So that's a really good principle to apply. Unless you have a specific reason to break, to have your chronological versus your processing order be different, make them the same so that it's very easy for you to work your way through your node graph with each pass. I'm working, generally by the time I'm doing a pass, I'm working left to right through my thumbnails and left to right through my nodes. If something needs to be pulled out of order, it can be, but that's a very helpful, sensible baseline sort of parameter to impose on the process in my experience. Cool question. All right, guys. Good session. Thanks for dealing with my speed bumps as I got it off the ground this morning. We've got so much cool stuff coming up here on the channel. Really excited to share with you. I'm excited to share my new grading space with you guys. Excited to share some of the products and new resources that I teased today in the near future. Lots and lots of fun stuff coming up here on the channel. Can't wait to share all these things with you guys. In the meanwhile, I hope you have an awesome Friday and an awesome weekend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next